Welcome to the official channel of Prosper Anang Ministries. Step into a powerful journey of faith, inspiration, and spiritual growth with Pastor Prosper, a privileged servant of Jesus. As the lead pastor of the New Testament Gospel Church in Benin City, Nigeria, Pastor Prosper is on a global mission to transform lives. He is an author, writer, fluently sharing God's Word, deep, life-changing insights right to your screen. If you are seeking spiritual guidance, a vibrant faith with God, you are in the right place.
Imagine two completely different versions of yourself. Like one is logging into a Monday morning corporate Zoom call, just quietly nodding along as your team agrees to, cut a few ethical corners or maybe inflate some numbers just to hit a quarterly quota.
Right, yeah, the pragmatic survival mode version.
Exactly. But then the other version of you is sitting in a church pew on a Sunday morning, singing passionately and deeply grounded in this belief in absolute truth. So what actually happens to your psychology and your spiritual influence when those two people just never meet?
Well, that is really the defining tension of modern life, isn't it? You have this profound cognitive dissonance where a pristine theoretical foundation of faith just violently collides with the incredibly messy, practical demands of everyday survival.
Welcome to the Deep Dive. Our mission today is to unpack that exact friction. And we're doing that by exploring a fascinating teaching drawn from today's Word for You devotional by Pastor Prosper Anang. The specific entry we are looking at is titled The Law of Addition, Activating Virtue and Moral Excellence.
It's such a brilliant piece of writing.
It really is. And he uses a phrase to describe that Sunday versus Monday gap that really caught my attention. He calls it having stagnant convictions.
Yes, stagnant convictions. It is a really sobering term when you unpack it because, we live in a culture that actively encourages that exact compartmentalization. Society tells you it's perfectly fine to have deeply held personal beliefs as long as they stay personal.
Right, like keep them out of the boardroom.
Exactly. Keep them out of the boardroom, keep them off your social media, and certainly do not let them interfere with your upward mobility.
But the source text pushes back really hard against that separation. To set the stage, it introduces a foundational scriptural law from 2 Peter 1.5. And this verse essentially commands believers to make every effort to add to their faith, goodness, or, depending on the translation you read, virtue. I really want to look closely at that word add, because it implies that faith, on its own, just isn't the finished product.
The devotional is very clear on this exact point. Faith is the bedrock, absolutely. It is undeniably powerful. But passive faith, a belief system that just sits quietly in your heart without ever mobilizing your hands, your feet, or your vocal cords, is treated as an incomplete asset.
Almost like half of an equation.
Precisely. If your faith is merely a passive possession, it simply isn't equipped to survive a world that relentlessly demands moral compromise.
Which means we really need a better understanding of what we are supposed to be adding. Because I'll be honest, when I hear the word virtue, my mind immediately goes to, Victorian manners.
Right, the parlor etiquette.
Yeah. I picture someone sitting quietly in a parlor, never raising their voice, never offending anyone. We usually define virtue by an absence of things. It's just, not doing bad things.
And that is the modern, highly sanitized perception of the word. We tend to picture a monk on an isolated mountaintop, completely removed from the messiness of the marketplace. But Pastor Prosper Anang breaks down the original Greek word used in that scripture for virtue, which is arete.
Okay, arete.
Yeah. And when you study arete, you realize it does not mean cloistered, passive holiness at all.
Oh, interesting. So what did it actually mean to the people reading that letter in the first century?
Well, it translates much more accurately to moral energy, intrinsic excellence, and specifically heroic courage. Historically, arete was actually a military term.
Wait, really? A military term?
Yes, exactly. It described the specific, gritty quality that makes a soldier stand their ground in the heat of a terrifying battle. So it is not about avoiding the fight by hiding on a mountain. It is entirely about how you stand right in the middle of the conflict.
Wow, that completely reframes the whole concept for me. It takes virtue from being this fragile, delicate porcelain teacup and turns it into something really muscular.
It's an active posture, not a retreat.
Yeah, and there is an analogy in the source material that captures this perfectly. Pastor Prosper Anang writes, "Faith is your internal anchor, but virtue is your external armor."
And we really have to ask, what happens when you attempt to walk onto a battlefield with an anchor, but you have left your armor at home?
It's not going to end well.
No, it isn't. According to the text, a believer who has faith but lacks this active, courageous virtue actually becomes a spiritual liability.
A liability. Whew, that feels a bit harsh. I mean, if someone has genuine faith, even if they are, struggling to live it out perfectly at work, calling them a liability seems like a really heavy condemnation.
It is a heavy term, I agree, but let's look at the mechanics of why the author uses it.
Yeah.
This describes someone who might be highly opinionated when it comes to doctrine. They know all the right theological answers.
Right, they can win any debate in a comment section.
Exactly. But when it comes to actual ethical manifestation, like how they treat an underperforming subordinate or how they handle company finances, they are completely powerless. They are deemed a liability because their actions misrepresent the very kingdom they claim to belong to.
I see.
Yeah, faith connects a person to grace, but virtue is the mechanism that demonstrates the reality of that grace to a watching world.
Okay, I see the distinction now. You have the anchor holding you to the truth internally, but without the armor of array, every single cultural arrow just pierces right through your public witness.
Spot on.
So let's explore that vulnerability. If virtue is our external armor, why do we so frequently take it off? Because, let's be honest, we usually shed that armor just to blend in, to avoid making waves, or maybe to dodge the label of being difficult at the office.
We take it off because we operate in a global culture that basically runs on situational ethics. The prevailing narrative is that truth is fluid, and a little bit of compromise is just the pragmatic cost of doing business.
It's the classic everybody does it defense. Like, we justify low-stakes compromises all the time, embellishing a CV just a little bit to get past the automated filters.
Or staying quiet while a colleague takes the fall for a project you both messed up.
Exactly. But the devotional highlights a critical, mechanical reality of the spiritual world that occurs when we make those seemingly small compromises. Pastor Prosper Anang warns that compromised character causes a leakage of spiritual authority.
Yes, that's a crucial concept.
I want to stop right there and unpack that phrase because it's so easy to just nod along to Christian terminology without really grasping it. Leakage of spiritual authority. Let's explain the actual mechanism behind that. What does that leakage look like in a person's day-to-day life?
Well, it really comes down to the psychological friction we mentioned earlier. When you compromise in private, your brain registers a subconscious hypocrisy, and that guilt creates cognitive dissonance.
So it manifests as a sort of mental block.
It manifests as a psychological hesitation. Yeah, a literal leakage of your confidence. When you try to speak with authority in public, or when you try to stand up for a moral principle, you lack conviction because your internal ledger knows you are compromised. Your words just lose their weight.
That makes perfect sense. And to illustrate the antidote to this leakage, the source points us to the biblical blueprint of Joseph in Potiphar's house.
A classic but incredibly relevant example.
Right. For context, Joseph is a young man trafficked to a foreign land, living as a slave with absolutely zero social standing or legal protection. And he is faced with secret, repeated seduction by his master's wife.
It is the ultimate pressure test of situational ethics.
Yeah.
Joseph has every earthly reason to compromise there. He is a slave, and she holds absolute power over his life.
A pragmatic thinker today would just say, do what you have to do to survive. God will understand your context.
Exactly. But Joseph doesn't just passively try to avoid the situation. He doesn't just awkwardly shuffle out of the room hoping she'll forget about it. His active virtue speaks up.
He confronts it head on.
He does. He says in Genesis 39:9, "How then could I do this great wickedness and sin against God?"
What I think is crucial here is that Joseph's choice actively prioritized divine alignment over temporary convenience. He recognized that giving in would cause a massive leakage of his spiritual authority.
Absolutely.
But I want to dig deeper into why Joseph's story matters for us today. The real light bulb moment for me wasn't just that Joseph did the right thing in a tough spot. It's the fact that Joseph had clearly decided who he was before the master's wife ever grabbed his cloak.
Yes, the decision was already made.
Right. He didn't have to weigh the pros and cons in the heat of the moment. He had pre-made his decision. Which brings up a really compelling question for you listening right now. Does this mean our private character must be a strict, one-to-one match with our public confession in order to safeguard our destiny?
That is the big question.
Like, is there really zero room for the private self to differ from the public self?
If we connect this to the bigger picture of spiritual maturity that the Devotional presents, the answer is an uncompromising yes. The synthesis of this teaching is that spiritual progress will always, eventually, be sabotaged by moral failure if your private choices do not mirror your public declarations.
It's an integrity issue at its core.
It is. You cannot build a structurally sound building if half the foundation is reinforced concrete and the other half is loose sand. Choosing virtue is making a definitive decision that the person you are in the dark is the exact same person you are in the light.
Which is a beautiful, inspiring ideal, but let's get real for a second. It sounds exhausting to maintain and practice. We've established that virtue requires active, battle-ready courage. So how do we actually practice this? Our fate in a modern world full of mundane, everyday, systemic compromise.
Well, the Devotional does not leave us hanging in abstract theology, thankfully. It provides a blueprint. Pastor Anang outlines 3 very practical kingdom application steps to activate this virtue.
Okay, what's the first one?
The first step is to audit your secrets.
Wait, auditing your private thoughts and secrets? I mean, that sounds like a recipe for neurotic guilt.
It does sound intimidating at first.
How do you do a deep dive into your own hidden life without just constantly condemning yourself for every single fleeting, less than perfect thought?
That is a vital distinction to make, actually. The audit is not about punishing yourself for the mere existence of temptation. Temptation is just a human reality. The audit is about brutally honest evaluation of your sustained, hidden habits.
Okay, so looking at patterns rather than passing thoughts.
Exactly. The text specifically calls out auditing your digital habits and your financial dealings to ensure they actually align with your public Christian confession. It is about checking the books, so to speak, before an external auditor forces you to.
Digital habits and financial dealings. Man, that hits incredibly close to home for the modern era.
It's where most of us live our private lives now.
It really is. It is so terrifyingly easy to have a highly curated, wholesome social media profile that everyone applauds while maintaining a completely different reality in an incognito browser or private group chat.
Or to be the person who volunteers at church on the weekend but actively fudges the corporate expense reports on Thursday to pocket an extra 50 quid.
Exactly. The audit forces you to confront those discrepancies. True virtue begins when the hidden ledger matches the public balance sheet.
That's a great way to put it.
Now, once you have completed that uncomfortable audit and identified your vulnerabilities, you move to step 2, which is draw unnegotiable boundaries. The key here is establishing scriptural boundaries for your business, your relationships, and your speech before temptation ever arrives.
And that before part is everything.
Right, because an internal audit only gets you so far. Once you know your weaknesses, what stops you from just making the same mistakes when the pressure is actually on? This is where drawing boundaries connects back to Joseph. It's the psychological hack of pre-making your decisions.
Break down how that works in a practical sense for the listener.
Well, if you wait until the moment the temptation is right in front of you, then questionable financial bonus is literally sitting on the table, or when the office gossip is getting incredibly juicy, you are relying entirely on willpower.
And behavioral psychology tells us that willpower is a rapidly depleting resource.
Right. By the end of the day, your willpower is just exhausted. But if you pre-make the decision, you don't have to debate it in the heat of the moment. The boundary is already there. It is unnegotiable.
You've removed the choice altogether.
Exactly. You aren't deciding whether or not to engage. You are simply executing a decision you made weeks ago.
That is the absolute essence of moral fortitude. You aren't negotiating with compromise because the door has already been locked and bolted. And that preparation naturally leads to the third step. Exercise spiritual courage.
This is where the arete really shows up.
Yes, this is where Ardea goes on the offensive.
So going on the offensive looks like what in a day-to-day scenario?
It happens when you are confronted with systemic compromise. Whether that is a toxic culture at your workplace, unethical practices at your university, or even subtle prejudices within your own social circle.
And you decide not to just go along with it.
Right. Exercising spiritual courage means you stand firm. You choose to speak the truth in love. And you absolutely refuse to cut corners for material gain, even when it costs you social capital.
even when it costs you the promotion, honestly. Because our mutiny is heroic courage on the battlefield. It's not just playing defense, it's holding the line when the opposing force is actively pushing against you.
And there's a central thought from Pastor Prosper Anang in the Today's Word for You devotional that perfectly anchors this entire 3-step blueprint. I really want to share the quote exactly as it is written because it is profound.
Go for it.
He states, "Faith gives you the right to enter the kingdom, but virtue gives you the authority to represent it. True moral excellence is not defined by what you refrain from doing in the dark, but by the spiritual courage you display in the light."
Faith gives you the right to enter, but virtue gives you the authority to represent it. Wow. That completely redefines what it means to be an ambassador. It's not just about, holding the passport. It's about carrying the actual weight and dignity of the office.
It's an active representation.
It is, which naturally makes me wonder about the ultimate outcome here. We've talked about putting on the heavy armor of arete, doing the painful work of auditing our secrets and drawing these unnegotiable boundaries. What is the actual payoff for carrying all this into our daily lives?
Well, to understand the payoff, the devotional explores a foundational scriptural law of moral fortitude, which is found in Proverbs 28:1. It reads, "The wicked flee though no one pursues, but the righteous are as bold as a lion."
The psychology of that proverb is just fascinating to me. The wicked flee though no one pursues. Like when you are living a life of compromise, you are constantly looking over your shoulder.
You're waiting for the other shoe to drop.
Right. You exist in this state of low-grade paranoia. You are terrified of the email being leaked, the browser history being discovered, the lie unraveling. Duplicity makes us incredibly timid.
It creates a baseline of anxiety that just completely drains your energy. But the inverse is the payoff. Righteousness in character breeds supernatural boldness. When you have absolutely nothing to hide, you fear no one.
That's real freedom.
It is. The text provides personalized declarations based on this principle, noting that walking in integrity actually preserves a person in the marketplace. Referencing Proverbs 11.3, it argues that moral excellence secures divine promotion.
So it's not a career killer, it's a career preserver.
Exactly. It provides a literal immunity from the downfalls and traps that inevitably catch those who practice duplicity.
Immunity in the marketplace. That is a brilliant way to frame it. The idea is that refusing to shortcut your way to success actually builds a much more sustainable, unshakable career in the long run, because you aren't building an empire on a foundation of deception that could just collapse with one audit.
Furthermore, sustaining this level of virtue requires the internal strength of a disciplined mind. The text points to 2 Timothy 1.7, highlighting that believers do not possess a spirit of fear or timidity, but of power, love, and a sound mind.
A sound mind is so crucial there.
It really is. This disciplined mind consistently chooses moral excellence over cultural conformity. It actively rejects the anxiety that tells you to just blend in.
Because immorality is not quiet.
Exactly, it's loud and courageous. And the spiritual mechanics of this are profound. The devotional uses some terminology here that we should probably unpack. It notes that this uncompromised character literally shuts the door to satanic accusations and breaks yokes.
Let's ground that jargon for a second. For anyone unfamiliar, we aren't just talking about a cartoon devil sitting on your shoulder whispering bad ideas, right? What is the actual mechanism of an accusation or a yoke in this context?
We are talking about very real spiritual and psychological leverage. When your hidden life is compromised, you give an adversary, whether that is your own internal guilt, a toxic coworker looking to throw you under the bus, or an actual spiritual force leverage against you.
Because they can point to the compromise.
Right. They can accuse you because the accusation is true. But if your life is an open book of integrity, there is no foothold for accusation. The leverage is gone.
And the breaking yokes part.
Breaking yokes refers to shedding the heavy, exhausting baggage of maintaining a double life. When you shed that duplicity, it leads to what the source describes as a season of visible, undeniable spiritual authority. You walk into a room, and your words carry weight because your character genuinely backs them up.
So if we pull all these threads together, what does this ultimately mean for you, the listener?
I think it completely flips the narrative we are usually handed. We are often taught, in very subtle ways, that virtue is a restrictive set of rules. A boring list of thou shalt nots designed to hold you back from having fun or getting ahead in life.
A straitjacket, essentially.
Right. But the reality presented in this teaching is that virtue, true arnosit, is an activating kinetic force. It isn't a cage, it is armor. It is the very thing that grants you lion-like boldness in your career, in your relationships, and in your private assignments.
It is the foundation of true confidence.
It really is. It strips away the anxiety of duplicity and replaces it with the unshakable authority of integrity. It moves you from being someone who merely possesses a theoretical faith to someone who actively enforces righteousness through their everyday character.
And that has been our journey today. We started by looking at the danger of a passive, stagnant faith and explored the necessity of aggressively adding the battle-ready courage of arete.
We covered a lot of ground.
We did. We looked at how compromised character causes a psychological and spiritual leakage of authority, and why we have to actively audit our secrets, especially those tricky digital and financial habits. And finally, we saw the incredible payoff. The lion-like boldness and immunity that true integrity brings to your everyday life.
It is a profound challenge, and I would really encourage you as you digest this deep dive to take that very first step of Pastor Anang's blueprint. Sometime today, examine your own life. Look closely at your digital habits. Look honestly at your financial dealings.
Don't be afraid of what you might find.
Exactly. Ask yourself the uncomfortable questions to ensure that your private life truly mirrors your public devotion. Ensure there is no leakage in your authority.
Because Monday morning is always coming. We started by talking about those paper beliefs and the testing ground of the real corporate world. So as you head back into whatever battlefield you're facing this week, I want to leave you with one final thought to mull over, building on everything we've discussed from today's word for you.
This is the practical takeaway.
It is. If true moral excellence is indeed the spiritual courage you display in the light, what is one unnegotiable boundary you can draw today? What is one firm line you can draw in the sand right now that might cost you temporary societal acceptance, but will ultimately forge your permanent spiritual authority?
That is the defining question, really.
Think about it. Thanks for taking the deep dive with us.